I'm going to be talking today about a topic I'm passionate about, and it's data sovereignty. Actually, the reason I want to talk about it is that there's a lot of data sovereignty washing in the press right now. And I thought that I would share my perspective, and my perspective is really founded in an interest for freedom all throughout my life. My real passion actually is much more freedom than data sovereignty. And what I want to talk about today is how the two concepts are intrinsically linked and why data sovereignty matters and what it really means for our world of IT. So, yeah, let me start with a small question, just a fundamental question. How do you define your identity? And actually, we can see the video of each of us, except me with a white background. You don't see much of my identity. But our identity is, everything that surrounds us. It's our habits, it's our beliefs. It thinks that a lot of it forms when we grow up without us even thinking about identity. Our identity, part of our identity is our culture. That's really embedded in who we are. And really, when we talk about data sovereignty, at the end of the day, what's at stake is really our identity. And why? Because throughout history, and you can go way, way, way back, the dominant culture tends to control wealth. Okay, we understand that very well. But also to diffuse its culture to others. Think about the British Empire that's not so far of us. I mean, that's just a couple centuries ago. And how the British Empire really took its identity to the colonies to the point that we still have a British Commonwealth. Think about other empires, whether it's the Spanish Empire, and you still have Spanish as the language that is spoken in most of South America, and a little bit of Portuguese, because there was also a Portuguese empire at some point. Go back in time and think about the impact that the Indian culture had to that side of the world. So empires or people in power, obviously they tend to take the wealth for them, but they also tend to diffuse their culture. And I forgot to mention the Roman Empire, which is uber impactful for all of Western Europe. And dominant cultures, I mean, we think about our world as we know it. And for those who study some history, we typically go back 100 years, maybe a couple of 100 years. But the world of humans and the world of cultured humans is much longer than that. It's a few thousand years already. And just looking at where was the power in the world in just the past 2,000 years is striking. I mean, who remembers that essentially the first 1,500 years of our era, India was the strongest power in terms of wealth. There was a mix of wealth per inhabitant multiplied by the fact that India was one of the most crowded places on earth until 1500, more or less. And then China was also a superpower. And honestly, for the longest time, Western Europe and the US, hardly had any power in the map. We'll go to wealth in a second, wealth per inhabitant. And then we saw the rise of Western Europe and then the US. And lately, if you look at the share of the world GDP, you see that China is rising up. And because I'm talking here on this graph about share of worldwide GDP, if China is rising up to being close to 20% of the worldwide GDP now, some other regions of the world are less than 80% when they were 80%, about a century ago. And through that time, the dominant culture was Egypt and then Assyria, the Greek, Romans, the Han, the Umayyad. Everyone forgets about the Mongol, who had a massive power among Western Europe and Northern Asia for a while. The Portuguese, the Spanish, the British, USA. And I'm putting China here because clearly China is now coming onto the map as a superpower. And, it's not a zero-sum game. People who have power are the people who have the most money. On this slide, the ones that are in a square is the power that has the most GDP per capita. And so not very surprising, the Roman Empire at the beginning of our era had much more GDP per capita than the rest of the world, 800, when really the average in the world was 450. So Italy was very rich, which you can still see when you go to Roma or Firenze. You can see how much wealth was at that time by looking at what's still around. And then power shifted for a while to Western Asia, while Europe was doing its middle age period, where it was less impactful for the world. And then with the Renaissance around 1500 and 1600, power is going back to Italy. And I should have stated around the beginning of the era, it's really Roma, and around the Renaissance time, it's really Firenze and Venice. You remember that at that time, Italy was not one country. It got unified as one country much later in history. And then power goes in terms of GDP per capita to the Netherlands, and then to UK, and then soon after to the US. Interestingly enough, Switzerland has the highest GDP per capita just after the Second World War, as Switzerland managed to really monetize very well its being neutral during the war. And then really the most money per capita is in the US. This is obviously a very crude representation of richness, because one thing is to have money. The other question is how much does money can buy you? And if any one of you live in the San Francisco Bay Area, you know that $1 is not worth the same thing whether you live in San Francisco or whether you live in Montana. Or I should say $1 million doesn't buy you the same house if you're in San Francisco, where you can maybe have a 2-bedroom apartment, or in Montana, where you can have 10 acres and really play outside. So it's obviously good, but still it's interesting to see that that GDP per capita over time has been migrating where the power was. And, if we look at the history, every big industrial transition, every big technological advance has been an opportunity for a major shift in where the power was. The first industrial revolution really gave power to the British Empire, and then the second industrial revolution and the third were very well leveraged by the US. I mean, US was in advance to anyone else in terms of electricity and then automation. And, the question is, where is the fourth industrial revolution taking us in terms of power? Clearly the lead is still in the US, but you've got Europe, China, and Russia all fighting for their fair share of power. And the battle is kind of hidden. I mean, at the time of the Mongols, it was pretty easy to understand what a war was. A war was you send an army and you kill people. Nowadays, wars are much more subtle, but they're actually not less real, okay? War happened in terms of cyber attacks. War happened in terms of mingling with election. War happens in terms of fostering heavy demonstration and social unrest in another country. It's all happening. It's just happening very differently. Any serious army in the world today has cyber warfare teams that are specialists of this kind of new wars. So the real question is, with this incredible transition of technology driven by the internet, mobile, AI, cloud, but also another whole lot of technologies. I mentioned IoT, nanotech, biotech, blockchain, genomics, 3D printing, Kubernetes as the next iteration of cloud. Where will the power fall? And there's nothing obvious into that question. If you look at the reality of nowadays, just to put a little bit more reality behind my words, there was obviously the Cambridge Analytica scandal. We hear that Huawei is being banned of entire countries as a supplier. We've got the Cloud Act, where the US federal government can go look at data that is stored and managed by any US corporation wherever the data is, which means that it's an extraterritorial law where the US federal government takes the ability to look at content from foreign countries. It can be actually content from these governments as long as they're managed by any of the big cloud, whether it's AWS, Microsoft Azure, or GCP. They have the right to do that. You've seen lately the Microsoft Exchange cyber attack that is just massive. But all this is still in the realm of our IT industry, but really the question goes much behind this. You've seen the question of the shortage of masks and the whole Western world not being able to produce face masks fast enough from February to June of 2020. We see the realization that we've outsourced most of our medicine manufacturing essentially to China. Anyone has tried buying a bike in the past month or two? There's just a complete shortage of any gear and brakes because they're all manufactured in China. Electronics for cars. Right now, there's a lot of cars that cannot be finished because they're missing electronic parts. So suddenly we're realizing that it's really this question of our sovereignty is really hitting our real life, not just IT life. And again, if I look at the past history, I'm looking at 2,000 years of history, whoever is the dominant culture is going to naturally want to impose their culture to others. And that's where it touches really our freedom and our identity, which means that we're going to see countries all everywhere in the world care more and more about digital sovereignty. That's a theme that I started noticing in China and Europe, but I'm now seeing very much in the US. And I think that it's just going to spread all around the world because what's at stake is really big. And, when we talk about identity, it's also because of AI is going to be more and more part of our lives. We're not just going to be thinking about it. It's just going to be. AI keeps being called out, but it's just that my phone keeps suggesting me things and I don't think about it. I just press on the button because it's just so easy. And obviously, AI will encapsulate whatever is cultural bias. So who produces the AI will have the power to encapsulate whatever is their culture identity, which really comes to who are we? And I see a lot of resistance, especially in Europe, around digitalization, around 5G. And they're blaming the technology, but really the real thing that they're worried about is how is technical progress, going to impact who I am? And behind this question of technical progress is really how will the dominant culture be able to mingle with what I think my identity is? So I really think that this question of data sovereignty is going to continue popping up as a really crucial question. I'm seeing here, I've noticed in the latest speech from Satya Nadella about Microsoft Cloud and the big plans. For the very first time, I saw Microsoft talking about sovereign data as part of their key pillars, their 5 key pillars of Microsoft Cloud. And today, Microsoft is bound to the Cloud Act. So Microsoft technically cannot offer to anyone else than US citizen a data sovereign cloud, okay? Because they're bound by the federal law. I expect 2 things to happen. I expect Microsoft to find ways to deliver Azure in a way that it's not managed by Microsoft, because that's their only way to escape the Cloud Act. And I expect the Biden administration to soften considerably the Cloud Act because it limits the ability of the big American cloud companies to do business abroad. And it's going to be more and more limited as the other countries pay attention to data sovereignty. And obviously, here, this is a quote from Thierry Breton, who's the commissioner in the EU, who just spells things out and say, Europe will not be a mere bystander, let alone a battleground. I mean, when I'm using terms as war, this is really what's happening, but very much hidden. So this is definitely going to become more and more of a topic. It's my passion in the sense that freedom of identity is one of the things I'm passionate about, and you can talk to Scality employees. They will tell you that this is very core to the values of Scality. I'm very proud that for 190 people. We've got 25 nationalities, and we know we've got customers in 45 countries. We know how to do support in, I don't know how many languages, but at least 15 different languages. So we're really passionate about this. And this question, I talked about it as a question between countries when I talk about battle or war, but it's really about people also and about businesses. So we're going to see that question asked more and more by businesses. And in a way, that's what we're here for at Scality. We provide storage that can be managed by our customers. And that's completely compatible with the cloud because we do see the value of the public clouds. There's going to be more and more public cloud. Obviously, we've got the free leaders. When we speak in the Western world, we always forget that there's a fourth leader, which is Alibaba, which is a very strong player in the Asian world. But really, if you look at our higher purpose at Scality is to give the technology to the people who want to protect their sovereignty, whatever that means for them, and it's going to mean different things for different people. So I'm going to stop there. This was just my introduction to say that behind the sovereignty kind of washing that we can see in the media, there's really something that's big at play. And at the end of the day, I really think that what's at play is our very identity as individuals.
This is something that we talk about quite a lot in Gestalt IT in our various, whether it's Tech Field Day or our podcasts. And I think that it's really important that you're presenting this in the frame of reference for sort of the macro global picture instead of just talking about, the bits and bytes of technology. And because I think it's easy for people to say, oh, this product does this or this product does that. Well, this is why this product does this. And I think that that's the key insight for me from this. If any of the other delegates have questions or comments, it would be great to have you jump in now. Otherwise, we can move on.
First of all, fascinating talk. We were all quite absorbed and impressed by it, obviously, because like Stephen was saying, that you hardly being techies you think about countries and data, where it's residing, where it's traveling, and all those kind of things. But you never thought about, where it all came from and, all the history behind it. But then we all, like you say, that you're thinking about it, you're aware of this problem and where it's going to go. And data sovereignty is very important. Have you actually, is there a solution in your head that, this is what companies should be doing? This is how they should be architecting. So, for example, without making a fundamental change in how data is stored or transferred, how do you keep track of something that, once it's digitized, it goes from one place to another? How do you track it and stop it from going there?
I think that not all data is equal. And we've seen that with social networks and with the teenagers and young share a lot of their private life publicly. In ways that was never thought to be possible in the past or never thought to be good, honestly. If you look at 50 or 100 years ago, people were much more private, and we have a whole generation that felt comfortable sharing a lot of their, what I would, as a rather older person, consider private life publicly. I think it's the same for companies. I think that organizations share more and more publicly and feel comfortable. And I think that this data can circulate and there's value in that. At the opposite of that, I think that there is data that is incredibly private. And this is true for companies as well. There are secrets that you really want to keep secrets. And I think that the technology today, it's not only technology, it's the world of technology and also the legal world. They go hand in hand. Is not ready today for that very secret data to actually reside in public clouds. There's just not enough safeguard in the technology right now. And sure, you can encrypt everything, but I'm sure you've read about quantum computers. I mean, it's going to be soon that anything we encrypt today with traditional computers can be deciphered by a quantum computer. So I don't think that we today have the means to truly protect data that goes in the public cloud. I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't use public cloud. I'm just suggesting that we should be conscious of what we're putting with the risk of getting public and what we want to truly keep private.
Thank you. But yeah, that's exactly the point I was making. That are we shooting for a goal that's not even achievable by using today's technologies? Is there a fundamental shift that we need in how we create and store data in a way that it can be protected in the way we want to? Even if people don't follow the rules, you can still, put some controls over them.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I had something else, a thought come up, and I don't know that anybody's here is going to have the answer to it, but just something I've been thinking about. Data sovereignty to me seems as much of a social issue as a technological issue. And so often we see engineers or tech-minded people feel like they need to come up with a technical solution for a problem. You can call it techno-solutionism. And they ignore other social factors, and there's massive fallout for things that an engineer, didn't necessarily think of when trying to solve for a problem. Do we face those same risks when it comes to data sovereignty?
Look, I'm absolutely convinced that the most vulnerable part of an IT system is the individual that's driving it. That the best hacking technique are social engineering rather than hacking the computer itself, or at least you start with social engineering. So yes, I would agree with you that a lot of it is rethinking really what borders mean and where borders are and why are borders necessary. And I think that we'll fall on the fact that where borders are necessary is whenever cultural identity has to be protected. Otherwise, borders are not necessary in my mind. But I would agree with you. There's a social question as much, if not even before the technical question.